Thanks. Thanks for keeping the conversation going and for sharing your work. I really appreciate it. It was fun to hear from a couple of you at least. I see that Brad is here. Hi, Brad.
Hi, everybody. It's Michelle and Brad.
Hello.
Hi. Guess what?
We're in Central Standard Time. Sorry, folks.
We screwed up on the time zone. We apologize.
I sort of figured we've had a little bit of a crit here going on.
All right, let me get a chair and a glass of water, and I'll be right there.
Well, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for your patience. So sorry. It is back to school night for my grad students at SAIC. I am department chair, so I was hosting our 45 first and second years. We used to call it pizza night. We used to gather, show slides, and have pizza. Now we're doing it remotely. So I wasn't even looking at my email. So I apologize. We just finished and I saw your email, Emily, and ran into the house and said, Brad.
Oh, well, we're happy that you're here. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about a few of the artists in the show's work, and we've talked a little bit about what it means to make regional work, and are we involved in some of these larger or more universal conversations. But we'll get started. For those of you who, I guess I should do the introduction now. The North of the 45th is this regional show that we have annually, and every year it's juried by a different juror. So this year's jurors were Brad Killam and Michelle Grabner. Brad is an artist based in Wisconsin who teaches at DuPage and has taught there for numerous years. And Michelle, as she just said, teaches at SAIC, also writes and is a critic and curator. And they both work together. Actually, where I met them was at Suburban, or I don't know if I met you actually at Suburban or at the Poor Farm. But they have two different spaces where they show artwork of artists near and far. And so they are steeped in many different practices related to art. So thank you for joining us tonight. Everybody who signed up to be here submitted questions for Brad and Michelle. And I don't know if you both would like to say something or if you would like me to launch into some questions.
Yeah, why don't we launch into questions? If people have, I don't know, if they want to follow up on some of the work we do, whether it's the Poor Farm or the Suburban, that's easy to, find the website and see what's going on at any given time. But yeah, maybe we should, because again, we're late. Why don't we just jump into, what people are thinking, the questions they have.
Sure. So I can go from the list of submitted questions, if that's all right. So how does collaboration alter your process or workflow? Is it important to your practice? And what has collaborating taught you both?
Why are you laughing?
Because you have such good answers for that question.
What has it taught us? I can't speak for Brad. But it really is a balance, like all things, right? I don't want to be here just laying platitudes at your feet, but working together has its rewards, and it also has a different relationship to time, right? How one has to be respectful, have these conversations, where often we forget when we're an individual studio artist. I forget this all the time, that when I'm talking to myself in my head, when I'm thinking through ideas, when I'm listening to other lectures by artists online, that is a different time frame than this exchange. And I think I need both of them. I think to be productive and to think through ideas, to have different temporalities of communication is really important. So what have I learned? I can't just communicate, and I can't just work in the studio as an independent artist. I need a little bit of both.
we made an exhibition in San Francisco a bunch of years ago, and one of the gallery artists said that they thought it was really one of the best uses of the space, but that's beside the point. The title of the show was "Working with Michelle Grabner Isn't as Much Fun as You Think It Is," or something like that, and that got a couple laughs.
Yes.
Isn't that about right? I thought that was a good title.
Self-reflexive, yes.
No, we started collaborating in the early 1990s, and I think the impetus for that was we really wanted to break down authorship. We wanted to, we bought in with all 4 feet, postmodern theory and thinking. And we were interested in not being the sole individual author of a piece, but that decisions were made by committee, even if that committee is only 2 people. And so that's really how it started. And that was at the core of the collaborative idea for us.
Good answer.
Thanks.
That is great. So why is showing other artists' artwork an important part of your practice, or is it an important part of your practice? It seems like it is, but I don't want to make an assumption.
No, it's correct. It's important for so many reasons. It may be the most, well, it's one of the most important questions that have been developed for tonight, for this exchange with us. By the fact that well, I can tell you the selfish answer to this, and it is actually selfish. One has to understand where one's own work exists within a field of other work and other ideas, right? So to do that, you want to get as close to other artists, their ideas and their work as possible. There's no better way to do that than to invite them to participate in exhibitions in the spaces you run. And, mind you, the Poor Farm and the Suburban are not, typical institutions. There's an intimacy when you come to us. And to understand other people's thinking, other people's work, other people's relationship to the world is so important. And I need that as a teacher, not only as a studio artist, so I can then think about my own work within this field of other ideas, but also I can then reflect that back to my students, whether they're my undergrads or grads. So I think that's just hugely important. I just want to say that it always brings me to my knees every time I work with an artist I haven't worked with before. That there's so many ideas, there's so many possibilities out there. It's a very strange time, right? Because we're dealing with content coming through our screens all the time. But the profundity of the muchness of who we are and what we do. I've been in this art world for a really long time. And like I said, it still brings me to my knees, people's practices, just seeing all of you going through all of your images. It's so rewarding and kind of overwhelming, I have to say. So important to keep context, to keep it real, I think is the short answer.
I've always thought of organizing exhibitions with other artists and including other artists in anything and everything we might do as a separate endeavor to what I do in the studio. So when using the phrase your practice, I actually have always kept everything separate. Studio, collaboration with Michelle as part of the studio, but running Suburban and Poor Farm, being a teacher, those things I always thought of as separate things that feed each other, but were always purposefully kept separate. I don't know if that's as good as answer as Michelle's, but.
No, Emily, can I just want to add one thing to that, and I think it may interweave my response may respond to another question that's coming down the line. And the Poor Farm, this not-for-profit space in rural Wapaka County, Wisconsin, is taking on, we were invited by the Warhol Foundation to be a regranting institution. Basically, we will give out regional grants. And that is something, if you would have asked us a year ago, we probably would have said, no, that's not the kind of administrative work we do. We respect what Warhol does. We love that there are foundations out there that support artists. But given the current cultural world, whether it's COVID, whether it's anti-racism initiatives, that seems right. Again, how do you give back? How are you responsible ethically as an artist? And how do you respond to other artists? So we said yes to that. So I'm really quite proud and honored that Warhol reached out to us. But it's saying yes is a reflection of now, trying to figure out what we need to do for each other in these very strange times.
Have you, or will you be reviewing projects in relationship to that regranting? You'll be the reviewers of all those projects?
We will be administering that process. So we won't make the selections. We will bring people in, professionals like you, Emily, to perhaps be a juror for that. So we don't, we're the fiscal host, and we will put out the call, and we will, do our very best to support artists. Right now, God bless the Warhol Foundation. It's emergency grants that they're putting forward. So before the end of the year, we will be giving out 60 emergency grants to artists in Milwaukee. This first initiative is in Milwaukee. But eventually we'll go to the whole state. It's going to be supportive of artist projects in this state.
It's actually really amazing. I read grants for regional regranting, and I can tell you, it's inspiring, like the way that you are inspired by studios practices, other artist studio practices. So good luck with that.
Thank you.
Great.
We will find you.
So the next question is, what is the role of art in the diverse politics of our day?
Go ahead. I have my answer.
Just look at Twitter. I think you got your best performance artist tweeting multiple times a day. Bernie got that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always, this is something I've always stood by. I'm rethinking it because we're all thinking about, and rightfully we have to think about what white privilege is. And who gets freedom and what is freedom? And I keep going back to Herbert Marcuse, who was an independent scholar, who would always talk about, the fact that we are in our studio, even if I'm making red monochromes, we are using our freedom to do that. And that by nature is political, right? And that's really important. So even though I'm not maybe illustrating or addressing very literally in a transactional way the politics that we're living in, by the fact that I'm choosing to be an artist is a political choice. And I stand by that. I can't say I'm rethinking it, but I am thinking who has the freedom to be able to be in those studios. And I'm learning not everybody does. So that is something that's really important, and it's changing. We're in a new paradigm, and I'm really thinking what that means. But I want to hold on to that, or some portion of that.
I think it's really important that artists who are inclined to take on the politics of the day with their work, that they do that. That's a great thing. It's not my cup of tea, but I still support it.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question is related to the current moment. How might the post-COVID reality affect the dissemination of cultural experiences in the rural or urban environments?
Yeah, this is how work is distributed. Of course, it's going to move digitally, right? It has. Instagram, the phenomenon of Instagram secures that. I think I was just encouraging my students to go across the street. Going across the street means going to the Art Institute. And there's a El Greco show and a Monet show on right now. And some of my students are in China. Some of them are not working in person. But to understand if one can, wherever one has the opportunity to encounter an object safely at this point, do that. That may be in a hyper local exchange, right? Walking up the street and going into a friend's studio while that friend is somewhere else. I think that's really important. So kind of building it in, I think we will be in for a great deficit if everything just is exchanged remotely and digitally.
Yes, indeed. It's a very different experience. Now that people are increasingly living in non-urban spaces, do you see a blossoming of art possibility in those suburban and rural communities, or what do you think that looks like, maybe?
Yeah. Again, given COVID, it's a little strange, but as I was talking about Warhol regional regranting, there is an interest in, the overbuilt big cultural centers, whether that's New York or Chicago or Los Angeles or London or Beijing, they're overbuilt culturally, right? They're stacked, they're vertical, or they have been in the past. And there's an interest in, even from those institutions, kind of really understanding what's going on. And it's around conversations around regionality, right? What is regional? What can the regional produce? Which is really exciting. Also those big cultural centers are just impossible places to live. That you can't afford a studio. You have to be, really active within a kind of gig relationship to where your jobs are coming from. So they're becoming much more inhospitable to artists. So it's inevitable because of practicality that artists are going to be moving upstate New York, coming back to the Midwest, going to places where they went to school. But also there's an interest in that because there is a kind of, I don't want to say reality, but there are kind of aesthetic differences that emerge from being off of those centers. So I think we're moving that way. I do not know what COVID is going to do with that. I mean, I think, it's interesting, right? We look at our big cities, and our big cities now are people are leaving them. So I'm not quite sure what the balance is going to play out after this cultural condition, but there certainly was momentum coming into throughout 2019, a relooking at what regionality is.
I was trying to find a beautiful quote by Peter Shadle in the New Yorker from last week, but I'm scrambling to find it. I couldn't find it, so sorry.
Paraphrase.
It's a good time to look at objects, especially drawings.
Oh, yeah. But that's the last question.
I agree. I concur. It is a good time to look at those things, and I just think there maybe is an interest in terms of making art as like a to sustain yourself versus making art to sustain a market, and that might be reflective of a more urban versus rural situation, perhaps. I mean, obviously we all need to eat, but I think that's a possibility in regards to seeing how there is this blossoming in suburban or rural communities. Do you see a difference in?
Yeah, that's so interesting, Emily. What you're talking about is a different a different economic relationship to how you live, right? And how where your art making comes within that. For years I said, when I was in grad school, I wish somebody just told me that I should just be a mail carrier. Just take that, take a day job and then do your work. And I can tell you, again, going back to the School of the Art Institute, my students don't think that way. The reality is, Brad and I have been listening to this new text. I'm having my students read it, and it's called The Death of the Artist. I'll show it to you at the end. I'll show everybody it. I really highly recommend it. There's a really good chapter on the arts and, speaking to, these economies that we're talking about and the expectation of making a living on one's work. One of the statistics, we were talking about this today, that only 60% of all art sales last year, and we're talking about many, many billions of dollars, goes to 18 artists. Only 18 artists are generating that revenue. That is crazy. And, you know, I would say that if everybody just kind of combs through some of these statistics, one will feel very good about just being able to locate where one's finances come and disentangle it from the idea of sales from your work. I think exactly to what you're saying, Emily. You know, I think the work suffers when one has to constantly be thinking about a market in a marketplace. You know, it's not unusual that, you know, trends change. And if we're changing, you know, if we're changing to those trends so we can, you know, make a living or somehow generate revenue based on the work we do, I think we're shortchanging the work and the ideas that we have.
Oh, for sure. Especially if it's like seasonality or fair related.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
How does teaching inform your practice? You mentioned teaching was important when I asked about why showing others work is important. But how is does teaching influence your practices and sort of how?
She's looking at me.
Well, you know, we're sitting here and we have very different kinds of students. Brad teaches at the College of DuPage, and he's working with community college students, you know, just 2 years. Many of them are general ed students taking a drawing class. Many of them will never kind of continue into the art world. And I'm teaching at one of the premier art schools in the country where I could not afford to go to school there if I wanted to right now. It is, a tuition is so absurd. And the expectations of my students are very different. So it's, you know, COVID has been great because we have these conversations about the classes that we are teaching online and, you know, is there any intersection there? You know,
We have a copy of the original Bauhaus workbook, which we pulled off the shelf yesterday or 2 days ago. And we thought, wow, this could be interesting to teach a class around these 37 projects or however many there are. And I think it's to sort of go back to your question, it's the studio practice feeds the teaching and the teaching feeds the studio practice. And when they're working in tandem, feeding each other, things are really hitting on all cylinders, even if the students aren't all hitting on all the cylinders at the same time that you are in the studio with this Bauhaus inspired curriculum or whatever. But when you're allowed the freedom to design a curriculum that you're really inspired to design, there's that exchange between the studio, the teaching studio, and the personal studio that really becomes a nice hybridized moment. And it doesn't happen that often for me. It might happen more often for you because you teach at a professional art school. I teach at a community college, like Michelle said, with a lot of gen ed students.
Yeah, I know that Brad brings up a really good point. I'm often very envious of the kind of foundations that you are obligated to teach. You know, just a kind of pedagogy that I kind of embrace is that, you know, these foundational classes, instead of getting them done, just getting them checked off when one is a freshman and a sophomore, that we should always privilege those. Those are things that we should be teaching our senior year. And now that we have, it was a year ago we were in Berlin and it was a 100th anniversary of the Bauhaus. So we have, again, all these exercises. I'm going to teach them to my grad students. I'm just absolutely convinced that we have to revisit again and again and again these fundamental basics of material, of composition, of drawing. And we often just, we you know, we're at a point where we think that if we get them done, we move away. But these are the things, you all know this. All of you guys are artists out there. We have to contend with these things every time we walk in our studio. So we should become cozy and intimate with them, and we should prioritize them. So yeah, I don't think that answered your question, but it was.
We're showing book covers.
Oh yeah, this is the death of the artist. You guys, it's on tape. You can, I'm using some of these chapters for my grad students and my undergrads. I recommend it. It's a harsh reality, but it will make us all feel very good about where we live, where we practice, and what we do.
Yeah, I agree.
So this kind of relates a little bit to what you were talking about, Michelle, in redoing these basic exercises throughout all of our practice. I always feel like anytime I teach a foundations course, I get really jazzed on like color and shape and drawing, and just it's so exciting to go through that again. So this question is, do you have any particular methodologies that you employ when you're beginning a new body of work or a new work? Is there one that you might share with us?
You know,
Yeah.
And I'm simple. I'm just always looking for pattern, the rearticulation of pattern, new pattern, thinking about routine, and then how does that pattern thread into the everyday? So that's where I always start. But that too is something very foundational, just thinking about organization and repetitive organization.
The one that comes to mind for me is go the opposite way of where everybody else is going. So that means like probably you were avoiding social practice for a while.
Fair. So this is another question. The works chosen for this year's North of the 45th can primarily be classified as paintings and in various materials, processes, and style. I'm wondering, what directions do you see painting the canon moving in the near future?
Painting the canon.
Yeah.
She's qualified to define that for you guys. I make paintings, but I can't say where the canon's going.
Yeah, and I don't quite know what the canon is anymore. You know, there is, again, rightfully, intelligently, revisiting of figure painting. So genre is back, right? Whether that's still life, figure painting, landscape. Genre is interesting because, well, genre theory, we hear about genre theory in the academy right now because it's a mechanism of organizing, right? It's a place where we can all start to interpret, right? So, you know, all of us here right now can look at a painting and probably identify it as a landscape, but then we will go in different directions as we interpret it, right? Is it an emotional landscape? Is it is it accurate in its representation? We will bring our interpretation, our criticality to it, but it's a place, a commonality. It brings us together. So I'm happy for genre, but genre also organizes our Netflix and what Netflix thinks we will like next, right? So it's tied to algorithms, which have its own spooky underpinnings to it. But right now, figure painting and figures of Black bodies in space is everywhere, very prominent, as it should be. As we deal with anti-racist issues, the idea of painting that figure that has been marginalized and left out of those conversations, we have to take a look at that. Institutions have to take a look at it. Curators have to come to terms with, structural racism. So we're seeing painting reflect that now. But, you know, that is going to evolve pretty quickly. That's a subject, right? That's not a canon. That's an urgent subject. I think, I don't know. I can't speak to what the canon is going to be. There's always an economy around what painting is. I don't know. I'm not going to be able to answer that well. I can just tell you what the subject of the day is, or the subject of the moment is. And I accept that. And as an abstract painter, I have to step away from that. I continue abstract painting. It's not part of that discourse, obviously, but it's part of a different discourse. So, we just have to be brave when we can't see what is unifying all of us outside of maybe the material.
Thanks. So the next question is, After surveying this work and getting a snapshot of what some work from the region looks like, what is one strength and one weakness that you see in the collection as a whole?
Yeah, that's it's not
Not enough etchings.
no.
More etching.
I think it's one of the same. It's maybe it's a Janus face. It's one of this. It's two sides to the same coin, and the coin is there's enough distance from these conversations, these prominent professional discourses, where I see imagination. Right? It's that something else can evolve. Right? There's a kind of distance from the centers, those major discourses that come out of the commercial art world in New York City, or the fancy art schools, or the unreadable art journals. So there is a kind of imagination that happens that expands that can really kind of show the best of the conversations that we're having because of distance. And I feel very fortunate not to be in a center, but to be able to interpret it from afar, because that gives me a lot of possible movements around everything, whether it's painting or sculpture or form. But at the same time, one always risks at that distance falling into a kind of regionality that becomes so closed and isolated, it's not part of a conversation. It can't go any further. So, like I said, it's one allows for imagination, the other it shuts it down too much. So it's like I said, of the same piece.
So, what's one piece of advice that you would give your younger self, knowing what you know today?
Is that you?
That's me. Get your career on solid footing before you start having children.
Ooh. Huh. Wow. Huh.
You don't want me to elaborate on that?
Yeah, elaborate. Please elaborate. Huh.
We came out of graduate school. We had 2 boys. We were young. We were struggling, piecemeal, part-time teaching gigs and other various gigs, and that's a hard life to live. And we see that now even more so. It's compounded itself tremendously. So I feel for anybody who is trying to make a go of it with a 2-income family that relies on part-time teaching, and they have children at home. That's a tough go. That doesn't mean don't have kids before your career's on track, but maybe it's really a suggestion to young artists to maybe think about being an electrician or doing something completely different than trying to earn a substantial living as a studio artist. You could be many things. You don't have to be just one thing. You could be all sorts of things in your life. And to have solid financial footing to support your family and your studio practice is a really smart move.
Yeah, there's the practical things. Don't be afraid of taking care of the practical things. But it's a lot of work. We all know it. Everybody here today knows how much work it is to take care of the practical things and making time for your own work. And but if you love it, you do it. It's I guess the thing that I always fought or felt pulled to, and I had to push it back, fight it, and that was being successful immediately. Or what does success look like? A success can look like a lot of different things, and it can happen at very different times. And it doesn't have to happen immediately. Somebody told me a long time ago, shoot for that solo exhibition when you're 60, like keep making work, and it's just down the line. And that always helped me. It took away the kind of urgency. I would work every day, but it would take the pressure off of really trying to hustle the work. I didn't do that as much. I could really put that time instead of hustling into actually being in the studio. So thinking about time differently. The world of culture wants us to be successful and influential now, not tomorrow, because that would be a failure, but now. And, we have to fight that. And it's very, very hard.
Yeah, I'm sure there were lessons learned along the way by having those struggles. So who are your mentors and role models?
Tony Tassett was one of my main advisors when I was in graduate school, and I can't remember a thing he told me. But I really have always admired him and his work, always. But if you really want to think, role models,
Well, we've been talking.
my favorite artist this week is Martin Purrier.
Oh. Yeah, I think having conversations with people who, speak a different language with you and who are long gone. I keep thinking recently of Giotto. We've been talking a lot about Giotto lately, and thinking about blue and thinking about a fresco tradition and thinking about a relationship to narrative and, what's happening with perspective. That was all really important to us. So, having conversations with people and in conversations, in your studio with people deeply, the work that they do, not of this time. Every day it changes. I think I support Brad. I had a lot of really extraordinary teachers who all taught me very different things. And it's an aggregate. There's never one person. I don't think there can be one person. It's an aggregate of many people and many voices and many passions that have, that drive me.
So the next one is kind of a little bit far away from that, but or maybe it's the same. I'll skip so that it's sort of related. In your experience, what's the practice of making art dependent on? What does it depend upon?
What is?
Having all the clutter out of your head for a decent amount of time when you want to work.
Maybe I don't understand the question, Emily.
So what do you need in order to make art, or what do you think artists need? You being an artist, what do you need in order to make art? In order to continue on in the studio, or is there something that you need in order for that to happen?
Yeah, that is a deep psychological question that is being asked. And I think, by asking that question, all of us would answer that very differently given on the time, the space, and the day that we're in, and playing mind games and head games, right, on a daily basis where, today I just want to be in the garden, but, I need this thing done for a practical reason, or you're being called by, what happened in the studio yesterday. So, it's always on our head. I mean, I don't know how to answer it except that it's being negotiated almost every minute of every day of my life to this point.
Yeah, some people could answer that. It's an emotional need. Some people might say it's a financial need. Some people might say it's a combination of a variety of things, emotional, financial, and so on.
Oh no, and there's also some of us are just haptic individuals. Our brains are wired for us to have pleasure in, for me, the repetitive motion of things. I mean, there's something biological also about the drive to move our bodies the way we do to produce a certain effect. So there's that as well. There's something deeply human about that, and about making work. So that is, again, impossible, and it's just always. And I think that the only thing I can say is that, we have to be aware of that. We have to be reflexive of these things and not be judgmental of when we're weak.
I think Michelle makes the most important point just there, is that you have to be aware of what your needs are so you can be productive, whatever those needs are. when you're aware of that, you can make that happen, and you can not be judgmental of yourself when it's not happening. Yeah. Good one.
Not beating yourself up and giving yourself space and time and flow and yeah. So is there an important piece of advice or a nugget that you'd like to share that somehow influenced your trajectory as artists or makers and writers and teachers? And
Yeah, I don't, this isn't going to work for everybody, and it's not something that, it's something that I think is, subjective for me, but it's, I never, kind of early on, I knew that I had to make work, but I never thought I would succeed at it, right? But I worked really, really hard. As you all know by now, I teach at the School of the Art Institute. I could not get into the School of the Art Institute when I applied to grad school there. So I was denied the place where I teach now, and that was a little heartbreaking way back many decades ago. But you kind of just have to trust the future. If you work hard, again, it's some platitude or cliche that if you work hard, it will be recognized. It will. It may not be recognized in the time you want it to be recognized, but it will. And you just have to kind of keep going at it.
What's the question?
A nugget.
Oh. Yeah, don't follow trends.
Yeah. Yeah,
Sure.
don't be trendy. Can you speak to the larger criteria or larger vision that you use when selecting artworks for an exhibition? Not necessarily this exhibition, but in an exhibition. Is there something that you're drawn to, like a moth to the flame, or what is there a criteria? Is there not? Is it subjective? What are those sort of subjectivities?
Yeah, it has nothing to do with taste or style. For me, it's how it, I think, starts to fire some neurons in my brain. If even something that looks so familiar, that walks the line of a cliche, can get me to ask questions about what, why, and how this thing is in front of me, I will look deeply at it. So it really is something that elicits a critical response from me. There are things that can be just so beautiful, and I can accept them as just so beautiful. And there could be some, what within that thing that is so beautiful that gets me thinking differently about what beauty is. So it's not about what is the best craft or, the most gorgeous of sunsets. It's about this thing that triggers a kind of, why am I looking at this now? And how can I be critical? How can I respond to it? How can I think critically about it? How can I carry this thing with me into the day? How will I be thinking about this 5 days from now? Again, thinking about, a painting of a grouse in the woods that's very graphic, something that we looked at. Why am I still thinking about that? I know what that bird is. I understand landscape, but I still am thinking about that. Why is that? So it's that kind of trigger. And I'm a pretty critical person, so I make room for a lot of things. What about you?
If you sat me down and said you're going to look at images on a screen and listen to people for an hour, each person gets 1 minute to talk about their work, and I would listen, I would probably be drawn to the person who stumbled and wasn't sure about what they were doing, because that would be an indication that they're working through something and they're in that process of discovery and experimentation. I'm more drawn to that than I'm drawn to highly refined, polished, completely thought through, not only discussion, but that kind of artist who's never quite sure they figured it out, but is hanging in there and working on it constantly.
So it's not having an answer. You're not answering something. It's artwork that isn't answering something.
Well, it goes back to the question previous, which is the nugget is it's all about the experiment.
As long as it's not trendy.
That too. Rule number 1 and rule number 2.
Oh, yeah. So one of the questions is, what is one of your favorite places to see art? And are there places to see art where curators are approachable?
No, curators are never approachable.
Yes, Italy, and if you speak Italian, you might be able to approach them.
Every place that hosts art, again, a small regional Kunstverein or a big legacy institution, see it, I don't know, we always stop by, we always see it. It drives us, it pulls us through the world, quite honestly. When we could travel, we traveled from, museum to museum, no matter where we are. That's the first, that's about all the culture we consume, right? That's for you and I. Yeah, it's a privilege to do that. A reminder, those cultural centers I was degrading not too long ago, commercial galleries, that's free content, right? You have to pay to get into institutions in this country, not so much in other countries, but look at it when you can. Go into studios, go into museums, go into art galleries, go into community art centers. You'll never know what you'll find. I am so, again, just, it's the depth of it all. It's, that alone is worth, being promiscuous.
I don't know if curators are approachable on the grand scheme of things. If you show up and say to introduce yourself to a curator and they don't know who you are and they don't know you're coming, it's a long shot that you're going to get a super warm reception for yourself and your work, if that's what the question was leading up to. But on the whole, the Netherlands is quite a good place to speak with curators who are quite open-minded and receptive to strangers who they've never heard of and have never met.
Maybe.
That's the way it used to be.
No, and I think it's a good practical professional question about how you access curators. If everybody understands curators as if they were artists, and they are, since the curatorial turn where we have, schools that are pumping out independent curators as much as they're pumping out MFAs, if you understand the curator of an artist, they are building and have an idea that they want to illustrate with your work, right? So they're not, there's a few curators out there who are stewards of artists who want to represent you and what is best for the work. But for the most part, that's not the case anymore. That's the old curator. Right now, curators want to illustrate their ideas, and they will do that by one of your pieces and a piece over here and go over here. So they know what they're doing, right? What Brad is saying, some artists are experimental and curious. There's still artists who are kind of curious and want to know what's going on, but for the most part, they have their own ideas. So, there's no end around. They have a kind of power. But again, if you work hard and you start putting it out there, they will inevitably have to encounter your work. Yeah, I don't know what to tell you. I talked to curators, professional curators at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. And, their complaint is we just don't have enough time. We would love to do studio visits, but we just don't have enough time to get out. And that's heartbreaking, When I curated the Whitney Biennial, my other two colleagues who worked with me, they picked up the phone and invited artists. My goal was, my mandate was I was never going to invite an artist unless I stepped into their studio and have a conversation with them. I just thought that that's what curators do, and it's not what they do.
But it's the ideal. Right, that's the ideal.
It's the ideal. And I think, you know, and again, I think curators do want to do that. It's just the studio visit is hard. You guys have had studio visits. It's weird. It's awkward. You know, we're used to it because when we teach, we're in studios all the time, right? But for the most part, it's an odd thing. You know, curators who come out of Williams College, they actually have to do, they have classes in which they learn the decorum of going into studios and questions in which they ask, because it's unnerving to many of them. So, you know, be patient with them. You know, it's not worth thinking that curators are bad guys. They just don't, they want to get it. They want to be artists like you, and they're intimidated for the most part. And maybe with that mindset, maybe it's easy to approach them.
Yeah, they're people. So, I guess I have another question that came in on the side over here that was asking, it's somebody who's in the talk who's asking what made you want to start to run galleries, like the Poor Farm and the Suburban. So what was the impetus for that? Because it is showing other people's work, but there's a few other things that are involved in that. So what was what made you want to do that, and what has kept them successful as places to see art and hear talks and visit with artists?
Yeah, there is not that anybody above the 45th will come down to Chicago anytime soon, but the Hyde Park Arts Center in Chicago has an exhibition up right now called Artists Run Chicago 2.0. And it looks at all of these artists run project spaces, including the Suburban, in the Chicago area. So Chicago has, you know, many of these kind of spaces. You know, we started simply because what Brad was saying before, we had a family and we couldn't travel, and we know how important travel and seeing different collections, understanding our world was, and it was just, we couldn't afford it. We had young kids, so we had to bring the art world to us. You know, it was that simple. So if we, you know, built the gallery, they would come, for, you know, that kind of thinking, and it worked. We had very influential, extraordinary artists come to us, and I'm grateful. I often think now I would not have the chutzpah to be able to do that right now, to be so bold, to open up a very small, very modest space, and to invite people to come, and they had artists, and they would come to show. So it really was practical. It's like, you know, again, to understand what we do and to understand the art world, you have to be around artists. We just couldn't afford to go to them. They had to come to us.
The original Suburban exhibition space had a square footprint of 64 square feet, less than 100 square feet. It was beautiful concrete block, painted white. And if I can be a little less practical, I had worked multiple jobs being a curator's helper, an installer, a preparator, a gallery director, a this, a that. And I just, in my bad attitude kind of way, thought we could do it better in this little 64 square foot garage thing. And it turned out that a lot of people appreciated what we started. And so you mentioned something about it gaining popularity or something like that. That was everybody else. We just put the exhibitions on and everybody else made it happen. They made the community around it happen. They made the network happen. They made the rumors happen. In fact, I think the Suburban is much better known as a rumor than as an actual thing, though it exists as a physical exhibition space.
Would you say that you've realized your creative dreams or potential, or is it past your goals? Or what are the endeavors that you're still seeking, or the goals you're still conquering or chipping away at?
Yeah, you know, I'm old, and I understand that time is short, and I just have so much work to do, and that's studio work I'm talking about. And I don't want much to get in the way of that. We have obligations, and I love other people, and I want to work for them, but I also feel a pull to be in the studio as much as possible these days. And, I'm grateful that I can for the most part. But that feels anxious to me. I feel a little bit anxious about the amount of stuff that has to be done, the amount of work that I want to do, the amount of patterns that need to be articulated.
Yeah, there's a lot of work to do. I'm jonesing to make really big sculpture. How's that? Totally impractical.
Yeah.
There's more space now, right? Is there more or less space because of has your practice changed because of COVID or not? Or your studio spaces, your art spaces, your way of working spaces, has that changed in the past 6 months or?
Yeah, it has. And that's the right question, and we should all pay attention to that. And I would think that everybody here tonight has seen some shift, right? So my vocabulary has changed because my relationship to time has changed. So there's a tediousness to the work that I didn't have before. Everything is tighter. So my vocabulary has shifted to a new time, and that makes sense. We should all do that. But then how do ideas then, so that is a vocabulary shift in relationship to time, but we also have to then think about how those ideas have shifted, what our obligations are, what does pattern mean now? Something, for me anyways, pattern is about dependability. Routine is about dependability. Accountability is something that you can count on at a time when time has changed, but our world keeps spinning, right? What is truth and what is a lie? What is coming out of our politician's mouth? What can we rely on? At least pattern we understand. There's something kind of factual, dependable. It moves beyond the field. So trying to think about both conceptual underpinnings to the time that we're in and the vocabulary shifts that come from a different relationship to time. That's for me. And then, the other projects, like I said, taking on administrative roles in a different way.
Are we still talking about the lockdown?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I think the lockdown, if I can call it that, for lack of a better quick descriptor, helped us to spend a lot more time together to talk about the things that really we want the future to embrace. And so, and as well as be in close proximity to the studio a lot more often, because we both, for the most part, are teaching remotely. So we don't commute 4 days a week to another location. We're constantly steps away from the studio all day, every day. So the relationship to the studio has, I think, been reinvigorated.
So you, Michelle, talk a lot about patterns just now. And so then that makes me wonder if ritual, this new time space continuum that we exist in, is ritual part of that? Is the pattern that you see in the studio, is that sort of a meta pattern that is part of the ritual of studio, or does that ritual not exist in that same way?
I don't know if it's ritual or routine. I think routine is a little more prosaic, and I think that is how I think about the routine of not only being in the studio, but the routine of work, or routine of how one thinks about doing administrative work from the same table that I'm making paintings off of. Like that is the ritual or routine are starting to kind of collapse into one another, which is really interesting to me because that's where they came from initially, where, you know, making work at the kitchen table, where, you know, very early on as an artist who was still thinking about pattern, but it was so close to where those patterns came from, the domestic situation. Now it's kind of coming back, which is really kind of terrific. And that is a result of being at home, teaching at home, curating from home. You know, offices are distributed around, but I never go to them. So that is a kind of, you know, kind of interesting circle that the current cultural condition is giving me. But also maintenance, thinking about, you know, how is one supposed to maintain, not just maintain a practice, but again, maintain ritual or maintain I don't know, the routine, right? And what is the ethical obligation to routine? Again, at a time when everything is spin, right? We get up in the morning, we read the New York Times, we're reading, you know, whatever news of the day, and, you know, that kind of spinning is so disorientating. That again, the maintenance of what we know, what we can know is really important. So, you know, right now I'm in the balance, and I talk to my faculty all the time where, you know, we're in new patterns, right? A new routine, but also balance with the great unknown. How long will we have to maintain great distance and wear masks and not come together? So how do we make that work? And that's where I am.
I lost the question.
So you answered it already, I think.
Oh.
Wait, well, no, maybe do you have any rituals in your practice that have played out or changed because of the current situation?
I don't know if it's the current situation, but I'm pretty consistent with 2 cups of coffee.
I'll take that.
That's true. Evening wine.
A glass of wine at night.
Yeah.
So maybe one more question before we let you go. Not maybe, actually, could you share with us one major flop or failure that you've each had and how it affected or still affects your studio practice in a regular way? Like maybe, I don't know if it's a flop or a failure or whatever you want to call it, but what did you take away from it, or how does it still influence you or give you energy? Or
how much time you got in the Eastern time zone there?
You know, I think, you know, maybe it's likely that everything is a flop, but over time it comes back more powerfully. I think we're all familiar with, you know, what we're making is really urgent and important, and then you find out it really is not, that it does not fit within the discourses, or it's misinterpreted, you know, and then you kind of feel sheepish and kind of walk away. But 15 years later, you revisit that work, and that work is powerful again. So, you know, I don't think it's ever a failure or a misstep. Usually it's just out of time, right? So that failure and misstep in another time, in another context, can be powerful and important again. So, you know, that just goes back to, hang in there with it and don't get rid of things. Just keep looking at them and revisiting them. I mean, I can't tell you how many bodies of work, you know, I dedicated a lot of time to, thought they were very successful, and then they embarrassed me for a very long period of time. I had to hide them away, and then in a move, bring them back out, and all of a sudden they have great momentum again. So, yeah, I think there's no failure. It's just a matter of context in which they can succeed.
I'm going to say something that's really corny and embarrassing, I think. When you stop, this is the corny and embarrassing part. When you stop following your vision, and you try to do something that's popular and of the moment and trendy, even though you know in your heart and in your body that you're really just doing it because it's popular and trendy. I'm not going to give any specifics, but I'm certain I've done that at least once. And and that's where you go off course.
Thank you.
I guess that wasn't that embarrassing.
No, I was ready for something much more embarrassing.
No.
I was like, wait, what?
Oh, did you know?
Oh, well, thank you so very much for everybody for all of your generosity of time here. It was great to get to spend so much time with all of you this evening. And we really appreciate all the work that you put into the exhibition, and it was great hearing from you.
And thank you, Emily. You've been a delight all this whole time
Yeah.
through all the many processes. Thank you. And gosh, we want to come up and visit. Brad was talking about Tony Tassett, who moved to Michigan, Lower Michigan, but we're going to come and try to do the circle at some point this fall. So
Please,
hopefully.
please do.
I'll be honest, you guys, I was disappointed we weren't coming up there because I really
Yeah.
wanted to come up there and be up there in Upper Peninsula, Michigan with everybody. And
We
well,
were
maybe not
allowed-
everybody, but be up there.
If we were allowed to officially bring artists through school, I would have had you in a heartbeat. However, they put the kibosh on that, and so it wasn't going to happen, but we would love to have you come up and visit, and we'd love to have you invite you up next summer to do something when everybody is eligible for that.
Oh, we would love that very much. And again, apologies for being late, and a shout out to Linda, who I haven't seen for a while. I know she's in there somewhere. So hello, Linda. And thank you all.
Thank you all, and thanks for waiting around too. Sorry about the screw up on the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. One thing, if you ever get to Milwaukee, please look us up. And then also, Sculpture Milwaukee is a really nice exhibition that happens outside. Some really powerful work. I was going to share some work with you guys, but you know, take a look at it. Come on down. Same thing with Chicago, but anytime.
We love that. We'll see you soon enough. Hopefully we'll break free from our quarantine.
Sounds good, everybody. Have a good evening.
Good night, everybody. Thank you again.
Hi. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks,
Hey,
Russell.
Carol.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Bernie. I love your laugh. See you later.
Thanks, everybody.
Nice to see you, Brianne.
Great
Thanks.
show.
Thanks,
Bye,
Emily.
friends.
Oh, great show.
Michael. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks, Susan. See you, Pascal.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks, Emily.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice that you can come.
Small style.
Bye.
Take care.
Here's the leave button.
Bernie, it's fun to hear you laugh, your belly laugh.
Now it's over there. Make it big again so you can see the leave button.
Thanks, Rachel, for all your help.
Oh, down here. Yep. And then
Maybe
again.
not see you tomorrow, but talk to you tomorrow.
We'll talk to you then. All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Bernie. I hope
Say
you're
good night. I can't get out of here. Trying.
Hasta la vista.
Hasta la vista, baby.
I'm gonna try